welcome to this final podcast on chapter 5 of Mice and Men, looking at Curley's wife. So in chapter 5, this is unfortunately the chapter where Curley's wife dies at the hands of Lenny. It's important for a few reasons, but in this chapter she is definitely painted in a different way than we've seen before. This chapter is just the two outsiders, Lenny and Curley's wife. Before this section, Curley's wife has put an act on the whole novella. In this section we see why she acts like she acts. We see the depth of her loneliness, and we see her try to connect with a person. Unfortunately, she picks the wrong person. So Curley's wife came round the last stool. She came very quietly so that Lenny didn't see her. So straight away, the adverb of quietly, we need to ask ourselves why she comes around quietly. So it's probably because if you go to her quietly, maybe it's because she doesn't want to be seen. So you could say this contrasts with her appearance. So we see that she's still wearing the bright cotton dress. She's wearing the red ostrich feathers on the mules. So the fact that she's walking in quietly contrasts with the fact that she's still wearing quite a loud and bright and garish outfit. She wore a bright cotton dress and the mules with the red ostrich feathers. So this has been repeated throughout the novella. Wherever we see her, she wears this. This is almost like she's wearing a uniform. So a fireman would wear something, a policeman wears there. Curley's wife seems to have a uniform of a cotton dress with the mules with the red ostrich feathers. She's wearing the cotton dress. We know what happens to things that Lenny touches, that he likes, that are soft. And we could even say that the warning signs are even louder now than the fact it's just them two in the chapter. She's still trying to look good, even for Lenny, because she probably thinks, she quite enjoyed talking to Lenny in the previous chapter. Even though she didn't get much back, she noticed that he was the weakest one, the easiest one to manipulate. And also highlights the fact that she's so lonely and desperate for comfort, she's wearing her best clothes for the guy that is seen as the bottom of the social chain. You can also link it back to the context where maybe she's only got one outfit. Like, I imagine if you go out into town or go to a birthday party, you've got a particular outfit that you wear that you think you look good in. Well, that's the same with Curley's wife. She seems to think she looks good in this dress. Maybe she thinks it's the closest she looks to the movie idol that she wants to be. So again, we've got the red ostrich feathers, so everything that we talked about in chapter 2, everything that the connotations with red are the same here. And I guess the red is also a warning sign that something is going to happen. So she said, "What you got there, sonny boy?" So this is her trying to be friendly, so it's a bit of a term of endearment, sonny boy. You could also maybe look at it the fact that it's a bit patronising and condescending. So you probably wouldn't say sonny boy to someone that you respect. It's probably going to be someone you see is probably lower down than you. So it's probably a patronising. Maybe she's trying to show Lenny that she's got the power. So she laughed, "George giving you orders about everything." So she's sort of laughing, even though she's probably done it a bit more of a mean way. She's trying to feel comfortable in the conversation. So she said quietly, "Remember, I want you to talk about adverbs and Steinbeck's use of language in your controlled assessment." So she said quietly here. So this is a different side to her that we've seen before. So before, everything's been negative or harsh about her, but now Steinbeck is starting to use language that's a little bit softer, a little bit different to how we've seen it before. Also, it's almost like if you say something quietly to someone and there's just the two of you, it's almost like she's trying to have a little secret moment with Lenny. She knelt in hay beside him. "Listen," she says. So this is an imperative. So remember, we've talked about imperatives before, where we say it's almost like an order or command. So the use of the imperative here is almost like she's giving Lenny an instruction. So then she goes down here and says, "Why can't I talk to you? I never get to talk to nobody. I get awful lonely." So this is quite an important quote, and probably one that you should be using, or at least think about using in your controlled assessment. So again, it shows the depth of her loneliness and the situation that she's in, where somehow she's got herself in this situation where she's married to someone she doesn't like, she's on a ranch full of men that don't like her, and she's probably just realising what she has got herself into. If you could go back the clock and go back to her mum, or her old lady as she calls her, she probably regrets marrying Curley and would do anything to go back and see her mother. The use of the word awful as well, the use of the adjective to describe how she feels, also shows the strength of feeling. So she doesn't just feel lonely, she's awful lonely. And again, lonely is repeated down here. So you could say that's a language feature that Steinbeck, or a technique that Steinbeck uses. So the repetition of the word lonely, and you could think to yourself, well, what is the significance of Steinbeck using those words so closely together? Also here, she says, I never get to talk to nobody, I get awful lonely. So remember what we've talked about in the descriptive and the narrative and the creative writing, that you use short sentences for effect or for emphasis on a particular point. And this is what Steinbeck has done here. So, Elsie get mad. How would you like not to talk to any? So we've already talked about in the previous chapter the fact that she's a questionable character, and a lot of her dialogue are questions. But here she's using a rhetorical question, and for the first time, Lenny or someone actually responds to her. Normally when she's asked questions before, she gets no response. So she's maybe seeing here that she's making a bit of leeway with Lenny. She consoled him. Don't you worry none, he was just a mutt. So this is basically saying that Lenny's told her that she's killed the dog, and she said she consoled him. So the use of the word consoled is interesting, as it's the first time we've seen Curley's wife as a sensitive person. This shows that she has an understanding side, that she's trying to reassure him that although the dog's dead, there'll be another dog coming soon. It also foreshadows her death in a way, and it's ironic. So she's basically telling Lenny, oh, don't worry that you've killed something, there'll be another one to replace it. And then in a couple of pages, or sort of 5 minutes time, she's dead at the hands of Lenny. She has become a victim of Lenny. And maybe Steinbeck, or maybe society at the time, saying, well, if he dies, she'd just be replaced by someone else. This is also the first time that we sort of see a feminine side, or a motherly side, or a maternal side of her, that she knows that Lenny's upset, but she's trying to make him feel better. She moved closer to him and she spoke soothingly. So again, another adverb, and again this is basically just leaning on from what I've just said before. This is another adverb, soothingly, the same point as consoled. So she's just trying to make him feel better. Soothingly, she's just trying to soothe him, she's just trying to make him feel better about the situation. So down here, when Lenny basically says that he's not allowed to talk to her because of George, she says her face grew angry. What's the matter with me? She cried. She doesn't really understand why people are interacting with her and not talking to her, and won't get in a conversation with her. She also doesn't really understand the connotations of her actions, and she doesn't really understand that how she addresses will get men into trouble, or how she got the jailbait tag. It's almost like, what's the matter with me? It's almost like she is a disease. And in some ways, she is. She's a married woman on a ranch that no one wants to interact with. She's not in a woman's world. On that ranch, she is in a man's world. So the word cry just tells her the strength of feeling, how strong she feels about it. Then Lenny says, well, George says you'll get us in a mess. So it's interesting to note about that, more so about Lenny than Curley's wife, is he says George says. So it's not you'll get us into a mess, or I think you're getting us in a mess. It's George says, which basically shows us more about Lenny, that he doesn't really know what's going on. All he's thinking is about the rabbits, that if he talks to her, he won't be able to get to feed the rabbits. He doesn't really understand too much why people are avoiding Curley's wife. So another big quote concerning Curley's wife is when she starts to talk about her dream. So she says, I could have made something of myself, she said darkly. Maybe I will yet. And then her words tumbled out in a passion of communication, as though she hurried before her listener could be taken away. So there's a few things I want to talk to you about that. One is, straight away, it's just that we can get from her that there's a real bitterness that she hasn't achieved her dream, or even got near to achieving her dream. Where it says maybe I will yet, we could maybe infer from that she thinks there's still a chance. So you never know, she might show the people on the ranch that she is an actress, or she could become an actress. So maybe I will yet could mean maybe that she doesn't think that the dream is over. And then her words tumbled out in a passion of communication. So if you think to yourself, if you may be talking to your best friend who you haven't seen in a while, and you had a particular problem in your life, this is what basically this means, is that she doesn't have anyone to speak to. This is all built up, and basically she's had it all bottled up, and then she's just let it all go from her. Maybe this is the first time also in the novella that she's being herself. All before was an act, and this is when we're seeing the real Curley's wife. So where it says hurried before her listener could be taken away, This basically just shows her desperation of her need to communicate, that she's had so much bottled up and then she just needs to get it out. So like I said before, she's just putting on an act. In this section we see why she acts the way she does and the depth of her loneliness, and that she's trying to connect with someone here. She's making a legitimate, believable attempt to connect with someone. Unfortunately, she's picked the wrong person. Also quickly want to say, she said darkly. You could link this to the previous chapters where we talked about that Curley's wife and her relationship of light and dark. So then Curley's wife says, talking more about the dream, I met one of the actors. He said I could go with that show, but my old lady wouldn't let me. First of all, this again shows how naive she is. Her age, naive meaning that is 99.9% would have just been someone that she met out in town, maybe just trying to get her into bed. It's basically just a chat up line. There's a slight glimmer of hope that maybe he could have got into films, but we think nearly definitely the fact that it's probably just a chat up line. The fact that she calls her mother, she doesn't call her mum or dearest mother or mother, she calls her old lady, which isn't particularly respectful. So we could imagine there that their relationship may be poor. It also tells us she doesn't talk about her folks or her dad, so we could probably say that maybe her dad has maybe moved away or the dad's not involved at all. So maybe that shows us that she hasn't had a positive or any male role model in her life. So perhaps if she did do that, she would have had someone there to maybe talk to her about how her dressing comes across, how her flirtatiousness, and why the men don't like it. So after all her talk about how she's feeling, that she was cried with anger, her face was angry. After her trying to console Lenny about his pup, after her telling him all about her dream about the actors, Lenny just says, we're going to have a place with the rabbits. So this shows that Lenny has absolutely no interest in anything but rabbits. And it's also sad in a way because Lenny is built up as the most likeable character in the novella. Even Lenny, who doesn't want to hurt anyone, who doesn't really know too much about what's going on, even Lenny cannot give Curley's wife sympathy. So basically that's showing the reader, or indicating the reader, that nobody cares about Curley's wife. So again, she started talking about the guy she met who thought he could put us in pictures. He says he was going to put me in the movie, says I was a natural. Soon he get back to Hollywood, he was going to write. So the reader, even the Curley's wife doesn't realise, the reader realised that this is a chat-up line. The fact that this man has said she looks like an actress or could be an actress, that's why from then on, Curley's wife has dressed how she's dressed. So some man has seen her and said, you look like an actress. So from then on, she's tried to almost repeat how she looked on that night. So I think in her head, she thinks to herself, someone might see me again and spot me and say, you're going to be going into the movies. And also, where it says gonna, so gonna put me in the movies is past tense. That's just showing us now that the dream has faded into nothing. She's waiting for the letter from the man who's chatted her up and given her dreams of the film stars. She says, thought my old lady stole it. Well, I wasn't going to stay no place where I couldn't get nowhere or make something of myself, and where they stole letters. So couldn't get in nowhere or make something of myself. So ironically, she's gone exactly to that place because she's stuck on the ranch. She's almost saying there that she could have lived a life of freedom where she could express who she really was, instead of under her mother's rule. But like I've said, unfortunately she's ended up just that place. It also just shows how naive she is, and actually how sad the situation, the predicament that she's got herself in. Then she says, well, I ain't told this to nobody before, maybe I oughtn't to. I don't like Curley, he ain't a nice fella. So this is a pretty amazing thing for a wife, or a marriage of 2 weeks, for the wife to say, confiding in Lenny, because these are very personal things. She tells us what we already know, that she doesn't like Curley, but the fact that she knows it shows us why she's been avoiding him, why they're never around each other, and why she needs the attention so much. So he ain't a nice fella links back to the earlier quote where she's been talking about that Curley, all he does is talk about beating people up. So we can actually imagine, even though we're not allowed in, the Steinbeck doesn't allow us into their house, their household, we can imagine that they probably got a awful relationship, and also that he's probably got dreadful habits and traits, and he doesn't seem a very thoughtful or sensitive person whatsoever. It's also a massive thing to admit, and you've got to ask yourself why she confides in Lenny. So possible answers could be that she doesn't see him as a threat, that she could probably deny it as a deniability there. So if Lenny actually went back and said something to George or any of the other guys, she could actually just deny it and say he's got the wrong end of the stick. And also, she probably knows that she's not going to get much of a response from him. He's almost a sounding board where she's almost just listening to herself speak, just letting the words come out of her mouth. So then, sadly again, she says she confided in him. She moved closer to Lenny and sat beside him. She said, could have been in the movies and had nice clothes as they were. And I could have sat in them big hotels and had pictures. So one thing we must say about that is that it's all past tense. So had nice clothes, I could have sat in them big hotels, and had. So all of them past tense. So that's basically her admitting that she knows the dream is over, that her dream is ended, it's never going to happen. It's also a bit of a fantasy for her that she maybe, when she's so bored and so lonely, she probably drifts off into her own little fantasy land. And it also shows the fact that she's not really accepting her new life on the ranch. She doesn't want to be a housewife, she sees herself as doing different things. It also shows in a way that she doesn't really know too much about being an actress. It is really a dream. There's no mention here about the craft of acting, that she really loves movies and it's her passion. All it basically is showing is that she craves attention. So instead of saying she wants to learn about the art of acting, she's basically saying she wants nice clothes, she wants to sit in a big hotel, and she wants people to take photos of her. All very superficial things. So the guy says it could have been a natural. So in a way that's bordering on a cliche of a chat-up line. And she could also be saying, or Steinbeck could actually be saying, that she's not a natural, so is she unnatural? Something in her life is definitely unnatural. So then this bit's almost sort of humorous. She made a small grand gesture with her arm and hand to show that she could act. So she's trying to tell Lenny that she could have been this world famous or a fantastic actress, and the way she demonstrates this is doing a twirly little thing with her hand. Almost she's saying, oh, that's how great I am, I can do a little action with my hand. So again with Curley's wife, the metaphor of light, the imagery of light is being used. So now the light was lifting as the sun went down. So remember we said the sun and the light are metaphors for hope and dreams. So if the sun going down, we could say here that the sun or the hope and the dreams have ended on the hopes and dreams for Curley's wife, but also for Lenny. Even though Lenny's not talking at the moment, his dreams do end. Everyone's dreams end by the end of this chapter. As sun is the essence of life, sun is the essence of life. If the sun is going down, this could possibly say that this is foreshadowing the death of someone. So then again, all Lenny's interested in the rabbits, and she says angrily now, so the adverb of angrily, don't you think of nothing about those rabbits? So it's quite ironic in a way, because all she talks about is being an actress, while she's actually criticising Lenny for just talking about one thing. She does exactly the same. So this is just after Lenny has moved closer to her, because Lenny's enjoying the conversation a bit more. So this just shows that she's a little bit wary, she's a little bit unsure, because remember Lenny is a big, massive, bulking guy. So she's a little bit sure of this guy getting so close to her. So George says, I like to pet nice things on my fingers, soft things. So warning signs here for the reader. Curley's wife laughed at him. You're nuts, she said, but you're a kind and nice fella, just like a big baby. So here we can just see that Curley's wife she's actually getting the attention that she desires, and she's really enjoying. Take Curley, his hair is just like wire, but mine is soft and fine because I brush it a lot. So here we see that she's quite vain just because she brushes her hair a lot, but also we see here the difference in hair is mirrors the difference in relationship or difference in personality than Curley and his wife. She sees Curley as someone hard, like wire, something that she doesn't really want to get involved with or have anything in common with, but she sees herself as soft and fine. So look at the difference between hair like wire and hair that is soft. So that's the difference that she's indicating there. She took Lenny's hand and put it on her head. Feel around there and see how soft it is. So obviously this is unknowingly a bad idea, and there's massive warning signs with the reader that we probably know this is only going one way. So Lenny said, oh, that's nice, and he stroked harder. Again, Stroked harder is telling us this is going wrong, this is only going to end one way. The warning sign to the reader. So this is here's the description of Lenny grabbing her trying to get away. Okay, she continued to struggle and her eyes were wild with terror. He shook her then and he was angry with her. Don't you go yelling, he said. And he shook her and her body flopped like a fish. And then she was still, for Lenny had broken her neck. So I remember the first time I read that is pretty a hard-hitting description of Curley's wife's death. So, flop like a fish, broken her neck. It's very powerful, very graphic. Unfortunately, she ends like she starts the novella. She ends as a victim. It describes her terror and it shows that she is powerless in death, but also the fact that she was powerless in society. I remember, like I said, revert to context. She's powerless in society and she was also powerless on the ranch, and it's also Steinbeck uses a simile here. So remember a comparison, her body flopped like a fish. So she's comparing him to a fish, that's a simile. Curley's wife lay with a half covering of yellow, and the meanness and the planning and the discontent and the ache for attention were all gone from her face. She was very pretty and simple, and her face was sweet and young. First of all, we can see that Lenny has done exactly the same as what he did with the puppy. So when the puppy died, to try to hide the puppy from people's sight, he covered the puppy in yellow hay. So again, we are getting the analogy of Curley's wife is being treated like an animal. So before we say that Cole's, the only time that the word bitch was used was to describe Candy's dog. Again, this is her being almost mentioned on the same level as a dog, that he's trying to cover Curley's wife up like he tried to cover the dog up. But also, yellow hay. So yellow could almost be sort of, the connotations are light and heavenly. So straight away Steinbeck is showing us that in death that she's almost like an angel. So, and the meanness and the plannings and the discontent and the ache for attention were all gone from her face. She was pretty and simple and her face was sweet and young. So interesting to say this is free from all negativity. So before, Curley's wife is pretty much described as negative throughout. In death, all that, she is free from negativity. So basically Steinbeck could be saying here that everything, all the craving for attention, all the meanness that she gave, all the meanness to her, every time that she was victimised, every time she was criticised, all of that is gone. So Steinbeck is suggesting here that maybe she is actually better off now, that she's actually better off, that she's passed away. She was very pretty, so this is actually the nicest thing that's ever been said about Curley's wife, and it's in death, so make of that what you will. It's also important, this section is actually important because throughout the novel all the characters are spoken in a pretty disgusting, very negative way. So it's important that our invisible narrator says this, that we know, so we know who she is, that we actually know, the reader knows that underneath it all, underneath all the makeup, underneath all the attention, all the craving for the flirting, it's important to know that she is a nice person, that she's an innocent person, despite what all the men are telling us. Now her rouged cheeks and her reddened lips made her seem alive and sleeping very lightly. The curls, tiny sausages, were spread, sleeping very lightly. So again, her face was sweet and young, sleeping very lightly. It's almost like she's sort of like a Walt Disney sort of princess, or that she's become an angel. So as well as Steinbeck saying that maybe she's better off dead, that this place is no place for a woman, he could have also been maybe saying that perhaps if she would have just been herself, so if she hadn't been craving for attention, if she hadn't been flirting with the men, if she hadn't been putting all the makeup on, if she'd just been herself, a normal person, then maybe she would have been happier. So another quote that I haven't actually got on this extract, but I have got on my notes, and I may have a picture of it, I'm not sure, is a quote, and the quote is from the invisible narrator, and it's, "As sometimes happens, a moment settled and hovered and remained for much more than a moment, and sound stopped and movement stopped for much, much more than a moment." So this is almost Steinbeck giving a prayer for her. Because none of the men are going to give a prayer for her, this is the narrator doing it. It's that space or moment where someone should have said something, one of the men should have said something or done something, but they didn't do it. So this is the narrator giving her her moment. Also, this is the moment where everything changes and everyone's dream dies. George and Lenny aren't going to get the house. Curley's wife is not going to be an actress. Candy's not going to get off the ranch. There is no one on this ranch that is not affected by her death. So then Candy says, "You goddamn tramp, you done it, didn't you?" So this shows that everyone knew this would end badly because of her. It also shows his prejudice. The prejudice against her just comes pouring out. There's no eulogies, there's no him saying, "Oh, well, she was a nice person." It's not very respectful. Also, where it says gradually his sorrow, this really means his sorrow. So he's not sad for her, he's sad for himself. It's also important to note that when Curley comes in, he's not emotional, he's not actually sad about Curley's wife. He doesn't seem to be particularly upset about it. He just wants to get revenge. So it might not be revenge for Curley's wife's dead. It might be revenge because Lenny broke his hand or did something to his hand and he wants revenge for that. So the last quote I want us to look at, and I will try to put another picture of this as I speak, is actually two more quotes, is "Then gradually time awakened again and moved sluggishly on." So here Steinbeck uses personification. So remember, that's giving an inanimate object human emotions. So this image suggests that time doesn't stand still. Time goes on. Life goes on. So what Steinbeck is saying is their dreams have ended, but life still goes on. However, the use of the adverb sluggishly suggests that life will still go on, but without dreams it will be a painful existence, that without dreams it's almost not worth carrying on. The last quote I want us to look at is straight after Curley's wife's death, and it says, around the last stool came a shepherd bitch, lean and long, with heavy hanging dugs." The quote I want us to look at is, "Halfway to the packing box where the puppies were, she caught the dead scent of Curley's wife, and the hair rose along her spine. She whimpered and cringed to the packing box and jumped in among the puppies." So this is straight after her death, and the dog walks in. So it's another animal reference. A lot of animal references are used throughout the novella, and it is almost saying, Steinbeck is saying that almost humans should follow animal behaviour. That the only person who felt sad for her death was the dog. Lenny, all Lenny was bothered about was that he'd done something wrong, he wouldn't be able to feed the rabbits. All George was worried about that he could find Lenny before the lynch mob got to him. All Curley was worried about was that he wanted to get revenge. All Candy was worried about was that the dream of his house was over. So the only person who cared, who cried or whimpered for Curley's wife, was the dog. So again, that shows us where the society placed her, but where the men placed her as well. Okay, so my notes pages, page 1. So like I've said lots of times, just pause if you want to look at some notes, just write down what you think is applicable, what's going to be useful to you. Okay, that's it. So here are the quotes down here that I talked about towards the end that you don't have in your extracts. So thanks very much for listening to the podcast. Hope it's been informative. Hope it hasn't been too miserable. Hope you got some bit of revision, a few tips, and I hope you will do well in your controlled assessments.